Okay, day 10, you made it to the very end. Are you ready for our last hand signal? Well, before we get to it, let's read the command. So here we are in Exodus chapter 20, and we find the 10th commandment in verse 17. It says, "You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's." So your hand signal is going to be hold up all 10 fingers and then give a motion of wanting to take something from someone else, but draw it into your heart. Why? Because we've seen in these last commandments a progression from don't do it to don't say it to don't even think about it. With the final command, we see internalized everything that has been talked about before. Coveting is something that happens inside of us. People wouldn't necessarily even be aware of it until it is manifested in stealing or in adultery or some other sin that's more evident. So coveting needs to be dealt with because it's easy to be concealed. And if you'll notice the way that this command is broken out, it addresses 3 key areas where we do typically covet what other people have. First, it says, don't covet your neighbor's house, okay? And so what are we seeing there? Don't covet your neighbor's stuff. And then what does it say? Don't covet your neighbor's wife or his manservant or his maidservant. And so now we've moved into your neighbor's relationships. So don't covet what your neighbor's stuff is. Don't covet your neighbor's relationships. And then we get that long list of ox and donkey. It goes on and on and on, which is showing us that what's in view here is a person who has a lot of things. It's a wealthy person. Those are things that someone who had a lot of belongings and a lot of money would have. So don't covet your neighbor's stuff, your neighbor's relationships, or your neighbor's circumstance. Now, actually, those 3 things are increasingly hard for us to get away from because stuff is something that you have some control over how much you have. Relationships, you have a little less control over. Sometimes you're just related to someone and you're going to have to be content in that relationship because they're never going out of your life. But circumstances, well, we all know that we have no control over our circumstances. So sometimes the most painful forms of coveting can be related to wanting the circumstance that someone else has. But all 3 of these areas are areas of temptation for us. So as you're looking at your life and thinking, is covetousness a problem that I have? It can be helpful to think along these 3 categories. Am I wanting to have someone else's stuff? Am I wanting to have someone else's relationships? Do I wish that my husband was more like someone else's husband? Do I wish that my kids were more like someone else's kids? Or do I covet someone else's circumstance? I wish I had the money they had, the vacations they had, or maybe it's the job satisfaction that they have, or even the happy church circumstance that they have. I wish that I had that instead of what I have. Because if we live our lives wishing that we were living someone else's life, then it's not very likely that we are going to look like the children of God. Steadfastness is one of the things that is commended over and over again in the New Testament. And steadfastness is fueled by contentment. If you were to take the 10th commandment and state it in the positive instead of in the negative, so instead of saying thou shalt not covet, what is the implied thou shalt? It would be content. You shall be content. We hear in the New Testament that godliness with contentment is great gain. Not only that, but in Philippians chapter 4, Paul tells us something really significant about contentment. He says that in all things he has learned to be content. Contentment is actually something that we can learn. So the 10th commandment is an opportunity to become students of what causes us to be discontent with where the Lord has placed us. Typically, it has to do with when our expectation is here and our reality is here. The distance between those 2 is where discontentment thrives. And when we're rightly oriented to God, when we've understood that we are to have no other gods before Him, and that there is only one God to worship, and that His name is worth extolling, and that He is worthy of both our rest and our labor, then it means that what we will do is we will see the line of our expectation and the line of our reality begin to do this, and contentment becomes the place that we live. And in fact, I would say that as the children of God to whom a wealth and an abundance of goodness has been given, we actually begin to see our expectation move below where we find ourselves. And that's where gratitude lives, is in between those two lines. So if you're concerned about obeying the 10th commandment, and I hope that you are, probably the healthiest practice that you can have is to count your many blessings, count them one by one. Live a life that's marked by gratitude, and not just in a general sense. Keep a record of the many ways that God has exceeded your expectations in His goodness to you, so that even when there remain difficulties with relationships or circumstances, or even with physical belongings, you can remember that His grace is a great and bountiful gift to you. Thanks for joining us for this quick flyover of the 10 Commandments. And I hope that the hand signals that you learned are going to be something that will help you from now on to remember not just the order, but the content of these 10 words to live by. The psalmist says, "I delight to do your will, O Lord. Your law is written on my heart." And if having some hand signals helps us to have the law of God written more indelibly on our heart, then I don't know about you, but I'm all for it. Because these 10 words aren't just simply rules to live by. They illustrate the unchanging character of a good God who shows His children how to live in relationship with both Him and each other.